On the morning of May 30th, 2025, one of the world's most iconic archaeological sites was shaken by a moment of chaos. Deep beneath the surface of Xi'an, China, where thousands of life-sized terracotta warriors have silently stood guard for over 2,000 years, a tourist suddenly leapt into the excavation pit. Without warning, he landed among the ancient statues, fragile, irreplaceable artifacts from the Qin dynasty, damaging two of them before museum guards managed to intervene. The man, later identified as someone struggling with mental health issues, was quickly taken into custody. But the damage was already done. How could something so surreal, almost unthinkable, happen in a place so carefully protected? And what does it reveal about the tension between history, tourism, and human vulnerability? Hit like, subscribe, and let's go. Before the incident, the man was just another face in the crowd, a tourist visiting China during the late spring travel season. He arrived in Xi'an a few days earlier, drawn by the same curiosity that attracts millions each year, the chance to witness the legendary Terracotta Army up close. Traveling alone, he checked into a modest hotel near the museum and followed a quiet routine, walking the city streets, eating simple meals, and keeping mostly to himself. To the outside world, he seemed calm, perhaps a bit withdrawn, but not unusual. Like many travelers, he carried a small backpack, a phone for photos, and a printed map of the historic site. Nothing about his presence raised concern. But beneath the quiet surface, something was building, something fragile and unsettled. There were small signs, if anyone had been looking closely. A nervous glance, a longer-than-usual stare at the excavation pit. Just enough to wonder what was going through his mind. On the morning of the incident, the museum was busy but orderly. Visitors moved along designated walkways, gazing down into the vast pit where the Terracotta Army stood in silent formation. Security staff kept a watchful eye, as always. But then something shifted. The man began pacing near the railing, his movements more restless than before. He looked down at the warriors, not like a curious tourist, but as if he were trying to make sense of something that only he could see. A guard noticed him lingering too long, leaning slightly over the barrier. At first, it seemed harmless, just another visitor lost in thought. But then he stepped back, took a breath, and without warning, climbed over the railing. Gasps rippled through the crowd, cameras dropped, people froze. For a split second, everything was silent except for the thud of his landing 18 feet below. No one knew yet why he jumped. But something clearly was not right. The fall into the pit didn't injure him, but it stunned everyone around. Dust rose from the impact as he stumbled to his feet, surrounded by centuries-old clay soldiers. For a few seconds, he simply stood there, blinking under the museum's lights, seemingly unsure of where he was. Then, in a moment that made hearts sink, he reached out and touched one of the statues, then another. One arm snapped off and fell to the ground with a crack that echoed through the hall. Above, guards shouted for visitors to step back. Alarms began to sound. But the man didn't run or resist. He just looked around slowly, like he was trying to find something. His expression wasn't angry or aggressive, it was lost, almost childlike. As security rushed to reach him, a strange silence fell again. Many wondered, was this vandalism, or something deeper no one yet understood? Once detained, the man was led to a quiet room inside the museum, away from the crowd and flashing cameras. Their staff waited for the local authorities to arrive. He sat calmly, not resisting, not speaking. When questioned, he gave only short, confused answers. It was clear something was off, his thoughts scattered, his focus slipping in and out. Later that day, a medical team was called in. Through records and identification, officials discovered he had a history of mental illness and had stopped receiving treatment months earlier. Traveling alone, without consistent medication or support, his condition had quietly worsened. What seemed like a random act of vandalism began to take on a more tragic shape. This wasn't just about broken statues, it was about a broken system. One where people like him, adrift and unnoticed, sometimes slip through every safety net. And the consequences, as the world just saw, can be painfully real. As museum officials assessed the damage, experts confirmed that the two statues he touched were original Qin dynasty pieces over 2,200 years old. One had a missing arm, the other a fractured leg. Though conservators would attempt restoration, parts of the damage were irreversible. News spread quickly, sparking outrage both in China and internationally. The Terracotta Army, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, wasn't just a tourist attraction, it was a cultural treasure, a symbol of ancient civilization. When the man was told what he had done, something shifted in him. He didn't panic or protest, but sat quietly, eyes wide, trying to grasp the weight of his actions. It's unclear how much he fully understood, but in that moment he looked genuinely shaken. He hadn't come to destroy history, but now his name would be forever tied to it in a way he never imagined. The question was, what happens next? As legal proceedings began, Chinese authorities faced a difficult decision. On one hand, the law was clear, damaging cultural relics carried serious penalties. On the other, the man's documented mental illness raised ethical questions. Was he a criminal or someone in crisis? Public opinion was divided. Some demanded accountability, arguing that mental health shouldn't excuse destruction. Others pointed to the lack of support systems for travelers with known psychological conditions. The museum tightened security protocols, adding more surveillance and physical barriers around the pit. Behind closed doors, government officials debated whether to pursue charges or deport him under medical supervision. Meanwhile, the man sat in a secure hospital ward in Xi'an under observation. He wasn't fighting the system, he didn't fully understand it. But a decision had to be made soon. Justice or compassion? Punishment or protection? It was no longer just about what he had done. It was about how a society responds when history and human fragility collide. In the days that followed, the man's condition worsened. Doctors diagnosed him with untreated schizophrenia, noting that his behavior had been triggered by a combination of stress, isolation, and the overwhelming sensory input of travel. He barely spoke, often staring blankly at the walls. For a moment, it seemed he might be forgotten, just another foreigner lost in a foreign system, far from home, too broken to explain himself. Back home, his family finally learned of the incident through international news. Shocked and heartbroken, they reached out to Chinese authorities, offering medical records and pleading for compassion. With their help, a clearer picture began to form, not of a malicious act, but of a man who had slipped too far without help. Though the legal process remained uncertain, a new option was quietly raised: medical repatriation. It wasn't a solution, but it was something. A sign that even in a system built to protect the past, there was still room for mercy in the present. After weeks of evaluation and negotiation, Chinese authorities, in coordination with the man's home country, approved his medical repatriation. Rather than facing trial in a foreign land, he would return home under strict supervision with a renewed treatment plan and long-term psychiatric care. It wasn't absolution, but it was a path toward healing. Before leaving Xi'an under quiet escort, he was allowed one final look at the museum from a distance. He didn't speak, but something in his posture had changed, more grounded, more aware. Perhaps he didn't fully grasp the scale of what had happened, but he seemed to understand that he had caused harm and that he was being given a second chance. For the museum staff, it was a bittersweet resolution. The statues would never be the same, but history, like people, carries its scars. And sometimes, even in the aftermath of damage, restoration of both art and the human spirit is still possible. Months later, the man remains in treatment at a mental health facility in his home country. He's no longer wandering unfamiliar streets or slipping through the cracks. With regular therapy and medication, his condition has stabilized, though full recovery is uncertain. His family visits often now, and slowly, trust is being rebuilt. The incident in Xi'an isn't something he talks about, it lingers in silence, like a memory he's still learning to face. For the Terracotta Army, repairs continue. The damaged statues have been partially restored, but some fractures will always remain, subtle reminders of a moment when ancient history met modern vulnerability. This story isn't about blame, it's about what happens when systems fail, when illness goes unseen, and when a single step can change everything. If someone near you was slipping, would you recognize the signs? Or would you only notice after it was too late? Let us know your thoughts in the comments.